So right now, Joel Peck is going to be our artist who's going to talk to us. He is the head of the 2D art department, and he is the department chair. So he decides a lot of what we do here at school at ECC in terms of what happens on the second and third floors. Printmaking, drawing, painting, photography, and 3D arts. He's in charge of all those areas. So this is the person you all want to know. All right, he makes decisions. So thank you, Joel, for joining us, and I will let you take over, and I'll stop sharing so you can take over.
Hey, thank you, Juan. Made me sound way too important. It's not how I perceive myself, but we're gonna go ahead and jump right into it. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. Hopefully we'll have a little time at the end for some questions. If not, we can share my email, and anything can be emailed to me. In any case, we're gonna jump right in. So as Juan mentioned, I am the coordinator for the art program at ECC. I come by way of BFA in painting from the University of Illinois. Basically was a painting major there because their printmaking major was defunct. They had some faculty that retired. I knew I was interested in printmaking, but I ultimately stuck it out in painting, and I loved it. I had some great faculty members that I was working with that informed a lot of the work that I was doing, but I knew that I was interested in printmaking. And so from 4 years at the University of Illinois right to the University of Iowa to study printmaking, where I got my graduate degree with a minor in drawing from the University of Iowa. I grew up in a family of art and artists. My parents were artists that collaborated on work together. They met at the University of Wisconsin in the late 60s, which was a very interesting time. Already having a glitch with my slides here. But like I said, my parents met in the 60s in jewelry and metalwork. And this is a piece right here of theirs that hangs in my house. I didn't have a real job growing up, but my job was kind of working in the studio alongside my parents. And so here we have a piece that my dad invented, kind of a process of electroplating, like etching on metal and electroplating other metals on top of metals. Was a process that involved a lot of chemicals. It was done outdoors, and because of those chemicals, so mostly in the summers. But I also traveled all summer long with my parents doing outdoor arts festivals. As a kid, I hated this process because it literally took up my social life. I had no social life as a kid. This is before social media, which if there was social media back then, probably would have made it even worse because I didn't know what was going on when I was away. But I was traveling from California to Florida to New Jersey to Colorado, Wyoming, doing all these outdoor arts festivals. But my thought process of like how I thought about art was being shaped, and I didn't really realize it at the time. And in retrospect, I absolutely love it. Loved those experiences and wouldn't change them for a thing. My grandfather, Samuel Greenberg, whose work here is pictured, filled the walls of my house, was a hero of mine growing up without really realizing it. Some of my earliest memories of being alive as a human relate to being in his studio as a 2-year-old even. He passed away when I was about 3 years old. So a lot of the memories that I have, I know are pretty early, but his work is collected throughout the United States, throughout the world, actually. He's got many pieces in the Art Institute of Chicago. And when I was in high school, he had a piece that was selected for promotional use for the Chicago Historical Society for a show on World War II. It's not this one on the right, but it's very similar. And this piece was reproduced on mugs, banners throughout the streets of Chicago, t-shirts, everything. And as a high schooler interested in art, like I thought this was the coolest thing. The painting on my left is really, your left is more indicative of the work that he does, kind of color schemes. This was a painting that hung in my grandmother's kitchen that I always loved. She had the opportunity to sell this and chose not to basically to pass it on to me. So this painting resides in my kitchen wherever I'll live in the future. But so I guess just that's a little background. I want to also talk about, before we start, about my work, about just some influences. Um, and not just having artwork on the walls and your parents being sort of collaborating on their process. I've always been a person to just really kind of be aware and find beauty in just things around you, right? And I think a lot of these things that you'll see in the next couple of slides here really manifest themselves in the work that I make. For instance, like a day in LA and seeing a paint bucket spill on the street, just like finding beauty in that. I oftentimes look up at, telephone wires and just find like interest in their like juxtaposition between sky, trees, the linear aspect. I think of these as like drawings. I take a lot of pictures, hundreds of pictures on my phone of, telephone wires in the sky. Interest in the natural world, interest in finding, an underneath side of a tree bark, right? In the direction a woodworm might travel. These are things that like stick with me, that I find really interesting visually first, do maybe a little research about like how this comes about, but just like always documenting, always just being aware. I've also always had an affinity towards targets, shapes of targets. I grew up in a family of outdoorsmen. I've never been I've never really hunted myself. I used to shoot for like target practice, things like that. But just the nature of even the packaging of some of these like purchase targets, things of that nature, which led to a collection that I have. I've always been a person to collect things, from baseball cards as a kid, sports figures. I have an antique dartboard collection, which kind of relate to targets, right? The very specific things that I collect, square targets, masonite panels, things like that. But I'm constantly searching for these things, which also you'll see a little bit later kind of manifests itself in some of the work that I do. I'm a sneakerhead. This is a pair of original Jordans that that I purchased in 1985 that I still have to this day. They weren't worn very much. You can see a little wear on them, but constantly seeking out sneakers. Here's a few from my collection, and things over the years that you start to like, sort of rework in your artwork, sometimes without noticing, sometimes very specific, whether it's patterns in a pair of Air Jordans, whether it's fades and colors, maybe it's just colors, color schemes in general, maybe it's the design of the shoe. I've always been interested in the making, right? This is an original drawing from Tinker Hatfield for the Jordan 11. And finding and more recently seeing a show on sneakers in Louisville, get exposed to some of these drawings that you never had seen before, which I just find incredible. As part of that show, that same show, they showed some shoes that like were prototypes and how they're made. And here we have like, I don't even know what shoe this was supposed to be, but it's like pieced together with masking tape. Like this is drawing, right? This is drawing on a sneaker. And for like, this is where my world sort of comes together. And even furthermore, this next one, if I can get it to move, there we go. This is a piece, it's an artist, Jim Lasser. He basically took a pair of Air Force Ones and altered them, created a new sole, laser cut, and a face of Obama. But to the point where, you could ink up the bottom of your shoe, walk or whatever, pull a print from, and it leaves this imprint, right? Which then kind of got me thinking, like, we talk about a lot about this like path we leave, the path we lead. Even our soul, like our shoes like the soles of our shoe leave an imprint, right? Like it's printmaking at its like every day at its finest, right? So I just thought this was interesting. This doesn't really have too much related to the talk itself, but I just wanted to include it because it's fantastic. Anyhow, lastly, drips. Okay. I'm fascinated by drips. I document like drips when I see drips everywhere. I teach printmaking, I teach screen printing, so I see a lot of drips on the regular, whether it's an ink or paint. or even, cake batter on the side of a bowl, perhaps. And again, you'll see a lot of this kind of manifest itself in my own work, but it also sort of relates to some of the artists that I'm looking at as well. These are actually these next, or I skipped one here. This slide and the next image are actually pieces that I make specifically just to create drips, to document, to photograph, and I use a lot of digital work in my printmaking. And these drips, like drip pieces, sort of function as just a layer of information. And I'll reference these later on, but in any case, I can get lost in these easily. And then, throwing ink away on the regular, like I find fascinating. Just I'm documenting garbage cans full of ink on the regular. It's a little messy at times. The next image, yeah, it's glitching here. I guess, I've always been interested in the natural world, right? Finding these drips in nature. I know the next slide is actually an image of like frozen drips, right? The one on the right is just 3 or 4 days ago. I was driving away, I looked in my mirror and I saw the way, drips were sort of creating, from the condensation in the morning. In any case, natural segue to a few artists that I was looking at when I was in college. I still look at, still intrigued by. This particular artist, Pat Steer, is one who makes literally large drip paintings. I've seen her talk a couple times, and like she really talks about time spent in front of these canvases and trying to make the right move. And I know she's trying to like justify the fact that they're just drip paintings, but like they're just drip paintings and they're gorgeous and they're beautiful. They're worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and I'd love to have one, but she's definitely someone that I find intriguing. Another artist is Mark Tansey, who is a painter who I was really looking at as an undergrad. I've always had the ability to kind of see and draw things pretty accurately. I loved just the fact that this guy was spending so much time making these basically one-liner paintings. They're very sort of based in photorealism, monochromatic paintings, but like funny, humorous. I love that. I love the idea of the game, playing a game with the viewer. Like this is fantastic. This is like a NASA launch, and they're standing around like a planet painting. They've all captured the the NASA launch, just like this woman sizing up and measuring a car crash from a race or something. Another artist is Vernon Fisher, somebody who, well, actually, sorry, we skipped one here. My slide's glitching out on here. But as someone studying printmaking, you can't help but be interested and intrigued by Robert Rauschenberg. Use of collage, you can see a little drip, juxtaposition of imagery, just all kinds of different things going on. Okay. Moving on to Vernon Fisher. Vernon Fisher was somebody who was a graduate student at the University of Illinois when I was there, or had just passed through when I was there studying as an undergrad. They had a couple large paintings of his hanging, but this guy in his like just visual language, these little vignettes, washy type loose work with like little mini vignettes of photo realism. Like if I could have been this guy as an undergrad, I would have taken it in a heartbeat. But allowing, what it is about his work to be, to influence things that I was doing. And you'll see with that particular piece, you see a lot of linear things, a lot of juxtaposition of things. This is a large painting I made at the University of Illinois. I was interested in the natural world. I was interested in this idea of kind of attacking my fears. And I was working through two different kind of fears at the time. One was like a fear of natural disasters, and the other was like a fear of insects. ultimately the idea with the insects kind of won out because I also find insects really kind of intriguing as far as just little sort of art objects themselves. Um, I don't know. I started drawing from books. I started, doing a little bit of research on my own. We see in the background what you're looking at. These are they're paintings, but they're very similar to the process of monotype. Monotype is ink on a surface just wiped around and printed basically. And I was studying painting, but I was also studying printmaking at the same time at Illinois. And they were like both bodies of work were informing each other. And I was intrigued by using the insect kind of as a metaphor for myself, for things going on in my life. You'll see some of these linear diagrams. The last two were actually prints. These are printed. They're actually printed over maps. The University of Illinois had a map library that when they had new maps coming, they had like retired maps, so they'd put them out. And as a student, I found myself frequenting this like map library and just taking all their maps to use to print on, do all kinds of stuff. But again, like the really sort of high contrast sort of language of monotype is what I was really interested in. It got me loosened up. It has very sort of spontaneous feel to it. And for me is what I really needed. I was really tight with my work. I was really rigid. And I'm also interested in this like juxtaposition between that loose type of ink with this like white linear line diagram. I think when I first started, some of those diagrams didn't really have any kind of like reference to the image other than more sort of visual formal content. But the more I started working with this, I started doing a little research of my own, and I started learning about some of these insects. And I really got into this idea of the social behavior of various insects, whether it's ants or aphids and different things going on, and sort of relating what I was learning to my life and my own life experiences. And so we're now sort of moving on into some graduate school work. This is a piece that was, it's a lithograph, but it's derived from a monotype that was shot photographically and printed basically with like sort of metal plate litho. Yeah, so you can see some diagrams down in the bottom right hand corner relate to like different colonies and where they cross over, where there's battle. I had just recently been married, and I was thinking about these like territorial issues and all kinds of stuff going on. Got another little glitch here. There we go. You'll see a couple images kind of repeat themselves. I was intrigued by this like sort of ant relationship in the middle. You didn't know if they're fighting or if they're like sort of exchanging food, like the food source. You see this image kind of repeat itself. And then you sort of learn like there's like insects kind of strike deals with each other for like protection from other insects, for food source. So like all these things I'm learning about this social behavior, I'm relating it to myself. These are all monotypes and monoprints. I'm playing with ink. It's the painter in me making prints, Xerox transfers, learning all kinds of new stuff at the university. Thinking about, even in like color, right? Color theory and how color shifts do different things. So one thing I would do when I'd start an edition of prints, I'd print like so many different color variations of them that ultimately couldn't make a decision on what sort of one I decided, I wanted to be the edition. So I just print, 50 different color versions. And that's what you see here. I started initially drawing from insects because the University of Illinois had like a little library that you could actually check out, like a drawer of insects, like you could just a book from the library. And so I would check out a drawer, I'd take them home, and I was drawing from them. But like that's kind of hard, and like they're valuable. You don't want to be responsible for lost or damaged, whatever. So I started buying my own. I started getting online. It's real easy just to buy insects, have them shipped. You know, these would range from like $7 to $25 to maybe $50. The larger you get, the more rare you get. They'd come on the flip side, there'd be like their location where they came from. For me, like this is as close as I want to come to these objects, right? These freak me out. Okay. And I found what I was doing is I was buying more. Like, okay, I'm just buying, I'm not drawing them, I'm just buying them at this point. I don't think of myself as an entomologist, but I am a collector of things. And so it was only natural for me to start collecting insects. But like, I don't really display them. I just like to have them. I think they're actually kind of neat, like in their little packaging, how they come. And so I was drawing from them to some extent, but it did become about like the collecting and the collecting itself. And now I'm more of an adult and not a kid. And, you know, you start to think about different types of collecting, different ways of collecting, different things that you've collected. I don't like my mom's passed, but she was borderline collector hoarder, right? So like there's a fine line there, and it was something that I was very conscious of. But these are still insects, part of my collection. Like they're beautiful. They like, again, they freak me out. Long antenna, long legs, freak me out. Can't imagine seeing some of these in person, or let alone like having these like be alive and like on me, touching me in any way. So I started thinking about making work about collecting insects, collecting in general. Let's see, there we go. This is an etching that I made at the University of Iowa. You start to, you know, so it's an etching that I also would draw on, right? There's still like the painter in me, still, you know, if things aren't resolved in the print, I was just ready to just work right on top of it. And I know there's a lot of traditionalists that might have had issues with that. I started selling some work. I started doing my own outdoor arts festivals. I did a little traveling when I was in graduate school, from Denver to Des Moines, wherever, and, you know, talking with people. And I ended up trading some artwork for somebody who was like a professional tire for different companies. And so here we have a couple stand-ins for some insects. I'm interested in location. There's just a lot of different things kind of coming together here. Recycling. I don't know if you can see this print, and there's like these insects on the bottom half were actually from the last print. So I'm sort of recycling images and allowing these like bodies of work to like connect to each other sort of thematically, almost like, you know, serial prints, I suppose. These are some large mono prints. All the flies are hand drawn with just some small markers. Everything else is printed. We've got some large etched plates that refer to inner workings of the central nervous system. I'm thinking about like internalizing things. I'm thinking about the body. I'm thinking about just this like reference to nature, I think, you know, which is it's always kind of been there for me. But there was a series of these prints. I think I made like 12 or 14 of them, took them to some art festivals. And I think I sold like half of these, you know, and I never thought of my work as being something that would sort of connect with like the everyday public, but you just don't know. You get out to some of these arts festivals and you start talking about your work, and you start to connect with people. And I really love that aspect of it. But yeah, so like, again, there's still an element to drawing in these, in that the fishing lures, basically, you know, I'm intrigued about, like, by them as much as I was for some of the insects themselves, but they're ultimately stand-ins, right? They're, you know, and it's really about deceit at the same point, because what is a fishing lure when you use it, right? You're deceiving a fish to try to catch it, right? This is not moving forward here. Here we go. Let's skip some. I'm gonna have to go back. Apologize. I don't know why it's doing this. In any case, yeah, hold on a second. Let's go back. Okay. Same kind of thought process. I'm thinking about classification, categorization, the collection, um, thinking about how insects are displayed in museums versus, purchasing personal collections. I started screen printing on clear plastic Duralar pieces and sort of suspending them in front of something that was like that you would see an insect displayed in a museum. I found insect specimen mounts that I was purchasing and putting these prints in. And then also try to cast light to give it these shadows. And in a sense, I was making my own sort of rare insect, right? I was printing some large monoprints. I started to get into at the University of Iowa. They had this sort of process of using foil on prints. So you get some metallics, which to me reference specifically, some of the metallic insects that I was looking at. Making little hand stamps for some of these ants, building, just all kinds of things. This actually does speak to an experience I had when I was a kid. I was like mowing the lawn or something, and I brushed up against a tree, and in a second, I was covered in ants, and like I'm on the ground rolling, just freaking out, like I could feel them all over the place, and I had no idea what caused it. So I keep mowing the lawn, turn around, come back the other direction, brush up against the same tree, and it happens again, and I'm like losing my mind. I'm on the ground rolling, trying to get these ants off of me. And I'm just thinking, like, if someone else is watching this, they're having a good laugh. But like that moment of just having something crawling all over you, just like absolutely, freaks you out. So I guess what you're starting to see is the insect basically kind of becoming a metaphor, for me, for life, for things that that are going on in my life. And you can start to see some of the drips sort of reintroduce themselves. This was a small print that was kind of important to me because I was doing a lot of mixing and matching. This is an etching with a relief print over the top with some hand-drawn things, using some stencils to block out ink in these areas. And while this was supposed to be the focal point, I started to notice some of the things going on, like this like juxtaposition of image over the beetle itself, which to me started to speak to some different things, not just like formal qualities, but like, tattoo. I've always been intrigued by tattoo culture also. But in any case, I made this like shift to, this idea of the collection, started thinking about my collection, specifically the dartboard collection, game boards, games, checkers, Scrabble, all kinds of stuff that I was doing at the time. This is a 4-plate etching, which actually is basically a recreation of one of the boards of my dartboard collection. This got printed in a number of different colors. I'm also intrigued by the like sort of vintage nature. So while I'm making prints, I'm also painting. The next few slides are images of some paintings that I was working on. These are all about 18 to 24 inches square, pretty much specifically referencing the size of those dartboards or targets. So I've taken the language, this particular one, I took the language of the dartboard itself, and I reintroduced some graphics from an old Nintendo game that I had played, a wrestling game. You'll see that kind of language sort of reintroduce itself as well. But the insects then are painted to have these shadows to give this like trompe l'oeil effect, right? Like to fool the eye, it looks believable. They're painted like even up to a few feet away, they look pretty real, they look pretty realistic, and they're pinned to this surface, and they're meant to look like they're shot at this target, right? Some random things more. This one is actually specifically one of the dartboards right out of my collection. Same thing, kind of playing a game with the viewer. It's about gamesmanship. I think some of these, when I made them, I actually made the painting and threw darts at the board, and that's where they hit, is where I painted the insects. Interested in the process too. I've always been interested in process. Another painting. I think this is now I'm out of school. My first job, I was teaching at Cornell University, upstate New York, and living in a new place, still interested in kind of this idea of games. But I think I made this piece specifically for a faculty show there. And I was teaching printmaking there, and I think nobody else really knew that I could paint at all, and I think kind of opened some eyes. But in any case, just making work, just having fun, loving what I'm doing. Really intrigued by, like I said, the like visual nature of some of these targets, and just kind of playing games. Right, I don't know if Juan, if you mentioned Fabiola made that promotional thing. I don't know if she had seen this, but definite like reference to Scrabble on that. Like I saw that and I was like, dang, that's fantastic. But in any case, here's a moment in time of a Scrabble game where the insects start to function as little text squares. These don't have text on them yet, but text does work its way into the sort of like backs of these insects, and you'll see in the future. So at the time, like I'm doing these images, I'm thinking about, like I mentioned, like these games and visual sort of games. I'm having conversations with a buddy of mine who was in graduate school. His name is Joseph Duba, and here's a couple pieces of his. And we had talked about, for years, we talked about trying to collaborate. Now, when I was at the University of Iowa, I took a class in collaborative drawing, and it was really important for me because it came at a time when I was really like protective of the things that I was making, and having someone draw on your drawing is like, you kind of have to take back like a moment and just like hope they don't really screw something up. But what you learn is you learn how other people work, you learn how to communicate, you learn how other people think and different approaches to work. And Joe and I had talked about for a number of years trying to collaborate on a piece, and we were invited. This was in 2013 to basically create a site-specific installation together. And it's like when you make work, you're having these like conversations in your head all the time. You're having arguments in your head. You're trying to resolve things. You're trying to figure things out. And like the collaborative process is like very similar. You just have you just bounce ideas off another person. So Joe's work and mine aren't that similar, but coming together was a challenge. So we had lots of conversations. We did ultimately create a piece called Bugs and Bunnies, and I want to walk you through it. We initially started by stenciling this like houndstooth pattern, which I don't know if you noticed in one of his pieces, which was something that he was intrigued by. I've also been interested in like patternation. So you see a lot of the insects, mounted specifically how they're categorized. And so we stenciled basically, we had like a wall and a half, and we had two sort of movable walls. We turned this gallery into basically our studio for a week's time. We had 1 week to work on it. We spent like 10 to 12-hour days working on it. And you can see some of the stencils here leaning up. But we had an airbrush we were working with. We were very specific to try not to use spray paint. But once this is young me a few years ago. But once the airbrush was done on the wall, then it was time to create the drip layers. Drip layers start to set some things back and create some depth. More stencils being used, more airbrushes, more target stencils. This was a common theme between us. The dartboard targets. Joe had done some work with some targets, so that was one of the things that kind of connected our work. So you could see like this piece being built basically no different than a print that I would be working on. Layers, thinking in terms of layers, making a pattern layers, using the drips to set that layer back, creating more sort of stencils, playing with those layers. Ultimately, before I left, I knew that I wanted to use these large sort of insect shapes that subtly referenced. I had like altered them to have these like skull faces on the back of them. And these are 5-color screen prints that were done on foam core before I left. And then I took them, and once I got there, I bought like a little saw, and I basically painstakingly cut out each one of these with the idea of nailing them to the wall and creating a little depth, create just like in some of the prints that you saw, creating some, with light, some shadow to have them kind of look sort of believable from a distance, I suppose. Here's one of the movable walls that we worked on. Basically, we had 2 of these, and we made like large targets, large dartboards in a sense. When these were finished, I absolutely loved them, and it killed me to not have the ability to keep these, because the show stayed up for a month and it was all covered up, it was all painted over. But I love this shot with like this piece in the background that's like partway finished, and just all the stuff, like we made an absolute mess, and it was fantastic. You can see a framed piece of mine hanging on the wall, or sort of leaning against the glass there. Here's some of the pieces in process of being cut out, and the little saw. And just a couple more sort of in progress pieces. I think one thing that I definitely learned from Joe is just like this, like the way he would make subtle shifts in color and light. A lot of his work is very subtle, relates to even just embossing. Sometimes he doesn't print ink, he just embosses on paper and uses light and just the way light hits an edge to create the image. Here's a picture on the left of Joe and one of his students screen printing right there in the studio to then cut out and put these on the wall. On the right, the image. While we're working on stuff directly to the walls, I started making images like basically on paper. I brought some of these that were already screen printed on. I was using some stencils. I started doing some airbrushing right directly to them, started drawing on them. So there was kind of this moment where you could still sort of work on maybe some side things while the larger thing is going on. Like you're always making, and you kind of have ideas, you got to get them out. So here's a couple of the finished images. You can see Joe's. These were meant to look like they were embossed on the walls. Little targets, little insects, sort of meant to look like they're being shot. Like a lot of the insects are close to targets. You see the drips. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun, a lot of ideas being bounced off. It's so energizing to work collaboratively. Like, and it was nothing that I ever thought I'd do, ever. Here's a couple. I thought this was fun. I'd show these. For the large pieces, just stencils, right? This is like garbage bag, blue tape, painter's tape, putting up some garbage bag to tape out. This is one of the images we haven't seen yet. So, like I said, there's 2 of these movable walls. One was more like a game. We actually threw images I can't remember what we threw at it to create like how close we get to the target, and you'll see the insects and his bunnies. But in this one, this is a finished piece. It's just the houndstooth pattern in the target, some drips, some bugs, and a wind-up bunny toy. And this is the other one that's finished. So 2 similar to completely different ideas, but having these movable walls being square, it just made sense that we create these targets. This is one like I wish I had this, and I want to recreate it someday. And then a couple more finished. So what happens through this process is, as soon as you're done, and because of the conversations you have, you want to continue to do it. Like you want to do it again. Like you want to keep creating. Like we had ideas we talked about that we just couldn't address in this particular one. And so for years we talked about collaborating again, and the opportunity came. Here's a couple of the pieces that were made, individual pieces like 18 by 24 spray stencils right on screen print. As I mentioned, the opportunity came here at ECC. One year we had a show where each full-time faculty member basically invited an artist to collaborate with and to create a piece in the gallery. And so for me, like it was a no-brainer, instantly call up my friend Joe, and I was like, hey, we got this opportunity. Let's do this. And so he came for a week, and I think we got a little smarter in how we approached it, right? Work smarter, not harder. So we ultimately screen printed the pattern this time instead of stenciling and spraying, and it went a lot faster. But you can see this whole wall was built just from basically 4 open stencils of this, like this is like a satellite that you see. And so we could align these images with the edge of this stencil on that screen. Probably could have used a larger screen, but it would have been a whole another set of issues with size and ink dripping everywhere and whatnot. Once that wall, really sort of subtle gray stencil was created, we then started again back in with some targets. There's definitely some reference to some things that we'd used before. But this particular installation, we started to talk about like, you know, a lot of Joe's work relates to things that happened in his childhood. And there's definitely that connection in my work as well. But we started talking about this idea of like just space and space in general, and what, like as a kid, like what you thought of space, how you're fascinated by it. Joe grew up in Florida, so he was not far from NASA. He actually went to different space camps and thought he was going to be an astronaut as a kid, you know. And you know, my connection to space was was through the TV show Lost in Space, right? Loved Danger Will Robinson, right? So you'll see some references to that. I don't know, but we're just having fun. We're making some things, some vinyl stickers, astronaut stickers. In this case, I did the same kind of approach with the insects, but I knew when I did them for the show in at Westminster College in Pennsylvania, that I didn't really particularly like the white edges. So I found this acrylic, this like black acrylic sheet. It's like a polymer, basically, is about I think it was a 1/4 of an inch thick. Same thing, started screen printing on them and then cut them out. And the way the blade hit the edge, it created this like little fuzzy edge, which I absolutely love because it spoke to like, you know, little follicles on legs of insects and stuff like that. So here's a couple close-ups, you can see this is a diagram of the robot from Lost in Space. Reference to Joe's, this is actually from a picture of him from his little space camp. This is cut out in masonite, was painted, and then with a cleat hung on the wall to pull it away from the wall, which then he's thinking about, you know, what I'm doing with light. So it's like we're informing each other, and it's just kind of coming together. And I think what's cool is to make this kind of appear as though it wasn't necessarily done by 2 separate people, but it worked kind of cohesively. We took some images from some different NASA launches from the 60s, put some screen printed them, you know, as like spectators. They're like checking out the show or something. I don't know. We're just having a good time. Here's a photo. It's a little brighter. You can see we got a little reference to some Space Invaders there. It's a game that I grew up playing a ton of as a kid. All kinds of stuff. Here's a shot from a little further away, and I apologize. I wish I had a shot of the whole gallery with some of the other pieces, because everybody's work really related to this idea of space. You know, there's a little mini version of one of the larger sculptures there that was a rocket, and I know Travis's work to the right here was a large cyanotype on canvas that had like astronauts and stuff. It was really cool show. So some of that starts to inform some more work that I was doing, not just about you know, specific to targets, but this is actually a dartboard that I had as like the other side, like some sports related. I think this is like a basketball one, but I started screen printing on some of these panels instead of painting. Because we're screen printing on the walls and the collaborative process, I was like, well, what if I start to screen print? I love the depth that was involved with some of those site specific installations. So what I started doing was buying panels that are a couple inches deep and screen printing on those, and then pouring like basically bar top. So I was pouring like maybe a quarter of an inch to a half-inch bar top, which is an acrylic that super high toxic. You know, you got to do it ventilated areas, but it provided some depth. So I'd screen print some layers, pour the bar top, and screen print more layers. And you can actually see in that in this particular one with the drips, these are drips from those early like drip drawings that I was making just to have, you know, that sort of visual language of the drip. So here's a part of the process of screen printing on panel. So this is, I think, 5 or 6 layers. You see monochromatically, they start to get built layer at a time. Yes, these are reference to one of the dartboards. I've taken out the images on the original dartboard. I know that like zombies are like all the craze right now, but like I was really intrigued by not just like shows like The Walking Dead, but like the makeup artists that were making some of these characters. Like I could never get past that. Like I never thought of the shows as being scary or creepy. I was just so intrigued by the work that went into some of these characters and images you can find stills of on the internet, or just taking pictures of screenshots from the show themselves. Once those layers are printed, I do pour that bar top and then print, you know, another, like this one I think has 8 or 9 layers of screen print over the top of it. Do a couple boards at a time, and then, you know, could do some different things. Here's another different version. This particular one, I took a vinyl cutter and cut out this like maze of a labyrinth, put a vinyl sticker down, and then sandblasted the bar top to dull it, to give it like this sort of mylar type feel, which ultimately also casts a slight little drop shadow underneath some of the images. And then again, screen printing over the top of that. You now see the insect that has some text on the back. It's like been tattooed. But like, you know, this one, I don't know if you can read, says game over, right? Here's a couple little close-ups. And you can start to see a little bit of the depth being created. There's a couple more. I think these were in the faculty show a couple years ago, working on some different things. You know, again, referencing to some early video games I played when I was a little kid. This is Excite Bike, where you could like, this is like the first game that you could build your own course, right? You had an interactive element to this game, which was like mind blowing. So cool. Even though it was like really basic and really simple, you have little ramps or things you put down. But in any case, this is a blank slate, right? These insects along the bottoms with the skull are actually scanned from an old print that I made. So I'm like recycling some images, and then 1, 2, 3 sort of references the podium after the game of Excite Bike. You'd have, you know, if you finish first place, you'd be up on top and you feel all fantastic about yourself. The image on the right, you see it in the background, you see this like diagram with these little white dots. Again, it was something that when I first moved back to Illinois from New York, I don't know, going through channels on the TV, there was like this channel 14 that was the same like every day, all day long. It was a black screen with white grids with dots in the middle. I don't know what the heck it was, but I found myself, I'd stop at channel 14 every time I pass it, and I would just stare at it. And again, like thinking about like finding a spill in LA, or looking up at, you know, tree, you know, like telephone wires, you know, juxtaposed in front of trees. This is just like one of those things like I was intrigued by. I couldn't explain it. So it found its way into many different pieces of mine, whether it was prints or paintings. It was the base for many different layers. Did I skip one here? No. So here, this gives you an idea of the panels. You can see the depth. There's like a quarter of an inch that, you know, after it's poured, you know, I tape the sides, they have to be level, and then pour the bar top on the inside, and then bevel the edges to file them down so they weren't sharp or they didn't crack. This one maybe gives you a little better idea. And then screen print right over the top of this. This is one of those screen print drip sort of drawings that I used to have as an image bank. that's then turned into a dot pattern that you can screen print and have a little depth to it. Here's another version of that last one you saw, just flip, different colors, just like working in as a student, wanting to see the image in different sort of color schemes. A couple details of those as well. Trying to speed up here. I know we're getting close to 3 o'clock. And yeah, here's a couple close-ups. And then here's one, like, I just thought it'd be fun to include. A friend asked me to make him some bag sets to play outside. So I was like, okay. So like, here's my artwork, using some vinyl stickers, using some stencils, just to create a bag set, like, which, you know, I actually just want these back from him now at this point. But in any case, that's really kind of where I'm at with the work. I know Juan also asked me to say a couple words about the program. So I'm just going to show just a couple images of the classrooms. A lot of the things that I talked about, the processes of printmaking, you know, we teach at ECC, etching. I didn't really talk a lot about woodcut, but we do teach woodcut, monotype. This is actually a picture of the screen print lab. You can see some work hanging on the walls back here, a couple students working. And then over here to the left side is actually a t-shirt press. Part of the Art 117 screen print class, we do start with fine works on, you know, fine art prints on paper, but we do shift to do some fabric printing and do some t-shirt printing. We were the first one in the state to do that. A lot of schools have kind of followed our lead, including NIU, other places doing some fabric printing also. We actually have 2 t-shirt presses in here. But this is the screen print shop. This is on the third floor in Building H. I'm taking pictures of these now, but we are going to be hopefully under construction, have a renovation. So a lot of this is going to change. Here's a shot of the printmaking studio on the 2nd floor. You can see a couple different presses here, inking stations in the middle, and actually a couple of the insects remaining from one of those site-specific installations you saw earlier. This particular student, I think, had just printed a woodcut and is cleaning up. Along this wall, you'll see these are old blocks. I think it's kind of cool. Like, you know, talk a little bit about the world around you and footprint that you leave. Part of when you cut a wood block in the shop, you kind of leave it out to let it air dry so the ink dries before you print your edition. And ultimately, I think students just kind of leave their blocks behind. And we started piecing this wall together of old blocks that I think is kind of cool, kind of tells the history of the program and some woodcuts that are made there. I love it. Like when we do renovation, these will come down and these will go up in the next space that we're in. The other thing I love about our floor, and to this point, is no custodian has touched this just yet, but like they're really adamant about not putting up stickers or flyers without permission. And so far they've left this, but this is my old office door that functions as a little room for a little printer we have. But when students make stickers, like this door acquires them, you know, it's kind of like it's like putting stickers on a skateboard or something, right? And then down here is a little mini version of that astronaut that was in that collaborative piece in the main gallery downstairs. I have a few images of students' work that I wanted to show just briefly. On the left, these are both woodcuts, 2 fantastic students that I had. But so much time and effort went into these. This particular student on the left actually worked on a 4-foot by 8, a 2-foot by 4-foot woodcut for basically 8 weeks. And it was the same amount of information. But what woodcut is, for those of you that aren't familiar, it's a relief process where everything you carve away into the surface of a piece of MDF or wood basically gets rolled up with ink and gets printed. And so everything that's carved away becomes white. And so this person, the approach was to work on a drawing and just carve away everything that wasn't drawn, and right on down to the hatching and cross hatching. And it's just phenomenal style that evolved over time, and have several prints of theirs that are in the shop, and we show these on the regular. And the same thing, I love this print on the right for like directional cuts, the energy. You know, the process of woodcut is very is very aggressive, and a lot of the prints tend to have this like aggressive kind of nature to them. Excuse me. Here's a monotype a student made, and they actually did put in a little gold leaf. This is a print of Flavor Flav, part of Public Enemy. This particular student would cut stencils out of plastic, tape them down, roll ink through them, and then take the stencils off and just kind of play with some mineral spirits and things. You like the like corrosion, dripping nature to them. Couple mono prints students made. Just really intrigued by just building layers, and I thought these were two. These are both done by the same person. You see, like the little they found part of the registration process of in printmaking is a punch system, and so we have a lot of these little punch hole paper like pieces of paper, using these as stencil, putting these down, pulling prints, just building layers, having fun, playing with it, just playing with colors. And then just lastly, a process that we do, not every semester, but we do some gunpowder drawings, and students will then just take some of this smokeless gunpowder, draw with it on paper, and then we basically just light it up. They produce some fantastic images during the process, and then ultimately, once the gunpowder is burnt off, you have a singed piece of paper that is residue of what once was. So yeah, just thought I'd share a little bit, and that's really it for me.
That's awesome. That's really
stayed,
great.
I stayed right at 3 hours, like right in an hour. I'm
That
like
was good.
super impressed with myself right now.
That collaborative show that you did here was the first show I saw at ECC, and that's when I was like, this is a cool place. Like they know what's going on. That was really cool to see that in person.
Right on.
Amy, anything? Do you want me to ask the questions that I posted in the chat, or would you like to ask the questions that I wrote and posted in the chat?
Well, there's more than just you, Big Shot. There's other questions here. Joel, it's always so fun to see people I work with talk about their work. It was really cool to see more of what you did. So it was awesome. And I like seeing how the way like you came up affects how you teach, how much you talk about the free maps and being able to check out the bugs. And like, I see you provide so many resources for your students in the same way that you had so many resources. So it's just really cool. But I will ask, I'll do a question now. Juan had a question. How do you manage teaching in the classroom with your art making practice? You have to teach within a traditional scope of printmaking, but your work sort of challenges the traditional printmaking expectations. How does this affect how you teach?
That's a really good question. Really good question. So, and it's hard for me because my roots are really traditional. My grandfather was a painter and printmaker that came to Chicago in the 30s. And he was actually like part of the very first ever artist guild that had the very first outdoor art festival at Grant Park. Like I have a photograph of that. So like everything that and even my father, like everything that we did was rooted in tradition. But I've always maintained an interest in newer technologies and things that are changing, and really trying to stay in tune with what's going on today. So I make it sort of a priority to attend the different printmaking conferences that are offered yearly, not lately because of COVID, but in my own personal practice, I've always been intrigued by the idea of using sort of photo-based image. I learned Photoshop early on. I feel like I use some element of Photoshop almost daily. But balancing, that's the tough part. And that's what Juan hit on with that question. When I was in school, none of my professors were practicing artists at the time because they're just so busy doing paperwork and teaching and this and that. And I vowed to myself that would never be me. And then here you are, with all this responsibility and being senior faculty member and doing things like program review. It's really difficult. And of course, having a family and raising children, and there's so many things you juggle, but I'm a person that in order for me to remain sane, I have to be making things. And I have a lot of ideas. And when like a lot of the images that you saw, like I have a difficult time finishing things because in my head, I'm on to the next piece or I'm on to the next idea before I can complete something. And I want to get that next thing started. So it is a challenge and it is so hard. You have to set time aside. And I know when my kids were young, it was like the second they'd go to bed, I'd be in the studio. You know, you have to set time aside and it's tough. But yeah, I've always been intrigued by newer technologies too. And just staying in sort of contact with the, you know, younger generations of, you know, different things that are being taught and different toys. And like, this is a impetus for what, you know, what we're doing with the program, you know, moving forward is with that maker lab and all the things that you can make. So, and combine and just, you know, work in collaboration with.
I have 2 questions for a lightning round, just quick answers, and then I know we're low on time.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite insect? And I'm going to adapt the next question. Are there any other board games that you're looking at to work with right now?
I do like the Scarab Beetle is definitely one. I don't know, Goliath Beetle also freaks me out. I'm working on an etching. Well, it's actually a mezzotint right now of a Goliath Beetle. They're just huge, but like the high contrast. Board games, no, I'm still like, I still scour eBay and all kinds of things for board games, always. Thrift shops, everything, you know.
Awesome. Well, I think that will do it for today. So I thank you, Joel. Thanks, Amy. And thank you, everyone who participated in the chat. And again, if you come by the gallery, you can ask for one of these fancy ECC journals or sketchbooks. I'm working on getting a little bit more artsy one, but come by, pick one up. They're free just for you guys. Thank you, Joel. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Amy.
My pleasure. And just want to add, you know, anybody that that wasn't here and watches this later, feel free to contact me with any questions. jpeck@elgin.edu. Really easy to find too on the school website. So appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thank you so much.